one of the main drivers of the project, former high-profile politician. Rolf Meyer, it's good to see you again, and thank you so much for popping in today. I'm interested, before we get to this initiative, key role in the negotiations. Do you miss frontline politics, particularly with what we see is going on right now?
Not at all.
Tell me why. I mean, you loved it at one point, didn't you?
Yes, I'm a politician, like you say, by profession. It's still in my blood, and I understand politics, but I don't want to be active in it. It's 20 years since I left politics, and I've been engaged in a variety of activities since. A bit of business, but in the last 7 years, actively engaged in advising other countries in conflict situations, helping them to resolve their problems based on our experience of what we went through. So it's a variety of experiences, and I love it. But at the same time, you know, we also realize we have to do something at home. And that is where this public-private growth initiative came about 2 years ago.
Let's get to that in just a moment. It's also interesting that you're speaking to us in the week 30 years ago when the announcement was made to unban the ANC and the SACP, and that started a raft of important announcements and the trajectory to where we are right now. What were you doing at that point? Do you remember all of that?
I absolutely remember almost all the detail. You know, I was telling this week, I had the benefit of meeting the Chancellor of Germany when she was here. And I was telling her that the first negotiations that actually took place was immediately after FW made the announcement of the release of Mr. Mandela. And then it was a question, when would he walk out of prison? And there it started. On the government side, President de Klerk said as soon as possible. The ANC wanted time to mobilize, to get people together. So the first compromise was actually that it should happen as quickly as possible, and it happened, of course, on the 11th of February, 1990. So, you know, I'm just giving this anecdote to say, you know, it's so fresh in one's mind. It looks like it was yesterday instead of just already 30 years ago.
But it wasn't yesterday, it was 30 years, as you say. 30 years on, your assessment of where we are right now?
There are good things and there are bad things. You know, the first 5 years was like a honeymoon after President Mandela took over.
Which was inevitable. It was always going to be like
Absolutely. That. And then the hard part came. You know, if I look back and assess where we are now, I would say it's a pity. It's a real pity that we didn't spend more time on really planning the transformation of the country. The transition was quick. You know, from the old to the new. We had a new constitution, fantastic. But how to implement that, make things happen in areas of education,
well,
land reform,
where do you think South Africans failed in that respect? What should we have given more attention to?
We should have sat down at that stage, like put together a grand plan, something like many people would say a Marshall Plan. That was not really possible, but even us as negotiators should not have stopped planning for the implementation part. Instead, we walked away. It was done and finished, and we left it to the newly elected government. And I think also they thought they could do it. But that didn't happen that way. And much of the inequality gap that we're sitting on, which is our biggest challenge in my mind today, could have been resolved and addressed much earlier. Now we're sitting with the leftovers of what didn't take place. And I think this is the big challenge of today.
We all know that hindsight is 20/20 vision, but there was also an urgency, there was an excitement, there was real momentum to get things moving as quickly as possible. And probably at that time, maybe you didn't have the luxury of sitting back and saying, we need to plan more.
Yeah, you know, it was a mixture of things. We didn't think about it. We thought our job was done once the constitution was negotiated. And of course the new government, I think, would not really have allowed us to carry on with that type of planning, because they thought they are now in charge, they have the responsibility, we must leave it to them. And that, I think, was the disconnect almost, as far as that is. And unfortunately, I have to come back to this, unfortunately we walked out, when I say we, the former white government people, walked out of the government of national unity too early and too quickly. I think we should have played a consistent role for a longer period in helping to influence decisions around actual implementation of government strategies and plans, of which there are many, even today still.
So why did you walk out early? What was the...
Well, there were a number of reasons. We don't have to go back now into that part of the history, but it was a mistake.
Now let's fast forward to 2020. We have an economy in this country on the back foot, and critical to achieving success would be agriculture. And this is an initiative that you're involved in, this initiative called the Agriculture Development Agency. The first response that I have to something like this is not another agency, more red tape. Why do we need another body to do something like this? What's wrong with the current structure? What is this, and what is different about it?
I think the difference is that this is firstly a private sector initiative completely. We have discussed this with the government. We've discussed this with the minister as recently as this week, Minister of Agriculture. And we came finally to the agreement that let's carry on with this as a private initiative, privately run and managed, completely so, but in conjunction with government in a certain way that we will take advice from government. And we will also, from our side, give inputs to government. But I think this is the big difference. So it's a private initiative, a private agency in that sense.
With what objective, Ruth May? What are you hoping to achieve?
I think it's firstly to address land reform. It can make a major contribution to that. It originated from the idea that mega farmers, commercial farmers, came to us and said, we would like to contribute to the need for land reform and creating new opportunities for emerging black farmers. But we don't have a nodal point, sort of, to do that. And so the original idea was to face that request and to come up with an answer to that demand. And that is the first. The second is, of course, to grow our agricultural economy. Like you said, it's one of the major growth areas for our economy as a whole. When we came up 2 years ago with the plan of this public-private growth initiative, we took 3 specific sectors to the President. The one was the automotive sector, the second was the agricultural sector, and the third one was tourism. And I think on the first one, automotive, it speaks for itself because there's huge potential there, and actually South Africa produced or exported more cars last year than ever before. Agriculture has that same potential, especially now with our export potential in a variety of commodities. And this is where we would like to bring in new farmers, more farmers, to grow the production.
The cynic in me says this is simply an attempt by organized agribusiness to protect its own interests and to manage land transformation to its own benefit according to its own agenda.
I think it's a very valid point. And that is why it's so important that we try to manage this from a social perspective. It's not only about making money. It's helping people who have never had the opportunity to be actual commercial farmers, to grow them into this space. So our activity of land reform on the one side, growing new commercial farmers, would focus for the beginning on 4 areas. The one is to bring in existing commercial farmers to help in terms of their production capacity, and to transfer it and to expand it to others. The second would be the mining companies. There's a lot of mining land available. The third would be existing farms that have been transferred to the state as a result of land claims. There are more than 4,000 such farms in the country, to make them active and productive land units again. And the fourth would be existing state departments that have land. There are plenty of them, including defense, etc., etc. Much of that land can also be transferred for the use of productive agriculture.
Within the agricultural community, there's a lot of polarity. You're well aware of that. Do you believe that there is enough buy-in from organized agriculture and government, and there will be many political detractors in this particular initiative who will be opposed to what you're doing? Is there enough goodwill, do you think, to accelerate this, or have you got a battle on your hands?
I think firstly, we have consulted widely and broadly. We had a small team that worked on this full-time the last 18 months in consulting as broadly as possible with existing agricultural associations and institutions, and also the agricultural business environment, the mega farmers, like I said, and also government, of course, but a variety of other agencies, including the banking sector and financial institutions. So what we did was to try and get the broadest possible consensus. I would not say it's all-inclusive. It's definitely not. And I don't want to speak on behalf of people who are still on the fringes. But the reality is that I think we have the vast majority of interested stakeholders who have combined their effort. We had a meeting last Friday where we had 75 people in the room representing farmers, potential farmers, aspirational farmers, and existing farmers, as well as these other sectors that I mentioned. And there was a unanimous decision: we are going ahead.
Who's funding this?
Well, funding is still a challenge, and we're not looking at only a pot of funding, because two things that link to what I said earlier. The one is the funding capacity to produce is, of course, a requirement, but more importantly even is the need for transfer of skills. You and I would like to farm probably, but if we don't have the skills, there's no chance we can start.
Exactly.
And the transfer of skills is, in my mind, the most important aspect of this. So it will be, I can say, almost organic. We have 32 projects already launched, which we announced in November last year, to the value of 12 billion or more South African rand. We will add to this as we move forward, and some will be established as pilot projects. So as we move forward, we are absolutely convinced that we will get momentum, and it can change the landscape in South Africa as far as agriculture is concerned immensely.
And the official launch is still ahead, is it?
It's on the 18th of February. It will be a date where we officially let this go. Minister of Agriculture will be present, and it will be an occasion where we will hopefully get the necessary momentum for all concerned to unite.
And Ruth May, I will make sure that our chef, Jenny Morris, gets you that short rib up from Cape Town at some point.
Fantastic.
Good speaking to you, and thank you very much for joining us.